Who made the taboos anyways?
The ego is not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think it's something that we should destroy, which can eventually become one of our most powerful allies. There is a time to heal and a time to integrate and also a time to fight. We are able to identify what we want and going out and
Welcome to Higher Density Living. Today, we're diving into the wild, forbidden world of the Poison Path Grimoire with occult herbalist Coby Michael. Imagine plants so powerful they can kill your ego, kill your soul, and unlock ancient wisdom. Think Belladonna, Datura, and you as your spiritual allies. Is poison the ultimate rebellion against a fearful society? Can it mirror your deepest shadows and set you free? Buckle up. This is dark herbalism like you've never heard before. Thank you, Coby, for being on the HDL podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
I know, I read your book. It's amazing. I encourage everybody right now, all of our listeners, to hop down into the show notes. The link will be there for your book. I want to talk a little bit, kind of set the premise, if we can, of the whole book. Is this poison path as a mirror? And you write that poison plants are mirrors reflecting parts of ourselves that we might not even expect or wish to see. Can you go a little bit into that, and then maybe even share a personal experience where plants revealed like an uncomfortable truth about yourself, or how it transformed you, as like understanding? I'm really interested in this part with the shadow self.
Sure. So, what I've kind of found and discovered with my work on the poison path is really a deeper understanding for what the word poison or toxin actually means or implies, and kind of how we've come to understand that over the centuries. So, it's really a very broad and kind of ambiguous term that gets applied to a lot of different plants with a lot of different effects and capabilities and purposes and uses. And today, I think in modern society, we sort of ultimately jump to the extreme of poison and toxin meaning something that is lethal. And it's a much broader sort of a spectrum when it comes to that. So a lot of these associations when it comes to poisonous plants, or low dose herbs, as we would call them in medicinal herbalism. A lot of the perceptions as far as like how they've been used, to kill people, or like crazy horror stories that we hear of like teenagers eating poisonous plants to get high and then winding up in the hospital, or going crazy for days on end, really kind of add to like the sinister vibe that they sort of have. So all of these kind of associations that we have from history and folklore that we associate with poisonous plants basically are filtered through the lens of the humans that have used them or abused them, or how they've been treated, and like our own perception of those poisons and of those plants and their actions. So really, it all comes down to, of course, dosage, circumstances, and the ways that those plants are being employed that determines whether they're poisonous or medicinal or magical or spiritual. So it's really like all of these things are kind of just bouncing back to us, our different perceptions on how we've used them.
What is something that you could share with our listeners, kind of a personal story about how this process works, especially with the shadow?
Well, there's a lot of different ways that you can work with these plants. Not all of them are able to be safely ingested the way that we would other plant medicine. So it's really important to understand the plants individually. And when we look at planetary correspondences, they're also under the rulership of Saturn. So Saturn, in a nutshell, is typically all about like hard work, persistence, slow progress. So they are plants that should be worked with very gradually, not jumping right in and eating a bunch of fresh leaves or putting them inside yourself in other different ways. So it's a very kind of slow process, and lots of different ways to connect with them energetically and spiritually. But they just have this quality about them, draws up the different aspects of our shadow. And through my work with poisonous plants and shadow work in general, I've kind of come to realize that there are different facets of this shadow. So there's aspects of the shadow that we kind of identify with in a way that is sort of empowering or rebellious or has this sense of like seduction that we want to embody these aspects. And then there's other parts of the shadow that are more based in fear, guilt, and shame, parts of ourselves that we don't want to identify with, that we tend to hide and keep from other people seeing, which is why it's called the shadow because it's hidden. So there's all of these different interacting aspects, and the poisonous plants seem to bring those up in people. So they do have that very seductive, sinister, kind of badass side that certain people gravitate to just because they're cool and edgy. They make you feel powerful in different ways. So they kind of draw you in that respect, but then they start doing this deeper work where you kind of reflect on those things that initially drew you into them and then sort of realize like, oh, well, this is coming from a place of lack or disempowerment or shame in a certain area, and why I'm gravitating towards these things because I feel this way about myself. So able to kind of bounce back and forth between these different aspects of the shadow to really realize the work that needs to be done in kind of integrating that.
Yeah, I love that. And I know you emphasize the aim of the poison path is not physical death, but ego death. How do you guide practitioners to safely navigate, imminence and alchemical process, especially with working with plants as potent as like nightshades, and let's stop there and then we'll get into the rebirth side. But how do you do that when you're looking from the physical death to the ego death?
Well, the understanding that physical death is definitely within the realm of possibility. So, approaching things from that mindset, common sense, safety practices when you're working with them. So the ego is not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think that it is something that we should be, trying to completely destroy, but kind of come to a deeper understanding of, much in the same way that we want to integrate and partner with the shadow, which can eventually become one of our most powerful allies in our own healing and the way that we kind of interact in the world and perceive ourselves. So the goal is not necessarily to completely obliterate these things, but to kind of detach from them in a way that we can revisit those aspects of ourselves in a way that is healing and empowering. So with poisonous plants, the first kind of step on that path is to either grow the plants or visit them out in the wild or start to work with them energetically. So that could be meditating with the living plants, working with the plant material in a topical formula like an oil or a salve or a flower essence. All of these different ways that we can sort of start to dip our toe in and connect with these energies in a safe way.
Is it now, like your book talks about the rebirth. What does the rebirth feel like? If someone's like going through these processes and they're safely navigating this. Is there mass amounts of transformation? Is it worth it? Like what is the idea with that?
Well, I think it sucks.
I love that. Yes.
It definitely sucks. I mean, it's a great thing, but it's also, not the easiest thing, and I think that that's
Hmm.
why a lot of people sort of get stuck in cycles that they're not happy with or different behaviors that aren't healthy or relationships that are, for lack of a better word, vampiric in nature.
Hmm.
So with this shadow work and this poison path work and these different aspects of ego and shadow, it kind of starts to strip all of that away and lays everything bare. And then you're this, brand new, fresh little entity that's now got to relearn how to kind of navigate the world and deal with all of these things that come up just through going through day-to-day life and sort of relearning your interaction with all of that. So it's a very, kind of starting over from the beginning and learning to navigate the world in a brand new way.
Yeah, I love this, Kobe, because it's kind of, everybody kind of has this, frosted flake spirituality, where it's everything sugar coated and it's I went here, I did this was exciting, love and light, very surface level. So this is why I loved your book so much because it's like you said, it sucks, and a lot of transformative work, especially when you're dealing with the shadow, it sucks. There's no way around it. And that's what I want to get into. Poison as rebellion. I know you connect poison in your book to the Promethean archetype and the witch's transgressive power, especially against patriarchal oppression. How do you see the poison path as like a modern rebellion against societal norms now?
So this idea of certain knowledge or certain powers or certain things being, inaccessible or taboo, and the idea of, seeking those things out and really learning for ourselves through individual firsthand experience, kind of our own understanding of what those things are. So that's where the whole Promethean, stealing the fire from the gods, eating the apple from the Garden of Eden, humans kind of accessing these taboo things either through their own agency or through the part of other spiritual agencies to see the world in a different way and kind of empower themselves, which looking through mythology, the gods don't always like that, but I think it's something that they definitely learn to respect and respond to. So this idea that we are able to identify like what we want and what we deem ourselves of being worthy of having and going out and taking those things. So that's kind of where the transgression comes in, is that that's not always received in a positive way by the powers that be, whether those are spiritual or physical.
Yeah, no, no, I love this. I want to stay on this because, with the rebellion, and always that hunt for forbidden knowledge. And I know you talk about that. Experiencing that creates an alchemical process of transformation. And that's what and for me, what I get out of your book is that's the whole idea is transmuting these personal poisons into empowerment, if that makes sense, and be willing. I mean, who made the taboos anyways? You know what I mean? Like, why is it rebellious? And you talk about this, it's like when you talk about the shadow in your book, it's like, it's not really bad. There's nothing bad. It's just something that's unknown, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we're taught to think that it's bad and taught to think that it's scary so that we kind of stay away from it and, you know, remain like these good, uncontroversial, submissive kind of beings that just take whatever we are served at face value. And that's why poisonous plants are so helpful in this kind of work and connect to it so often in their mythology. And there's even a lot of gatekeeping when it comes to working with these plants, and some of the individuals that comes from have good intentions and others maybe not so much, and it's really through that personal exploration and just firsthand learning it through through your own exposure that you're able to kind of break through some of those taboos and misconceptions that surround working with not only poisonous plants and psychedelic plant medicine, but also just like herbal medicine in general, and kind of like taking that back into our own hands as like the common people's medicine, the way of like taking care of ourselves, making ourselves stronger, facilitating community. um yeah.
No, I love that. And you talk about balance, especially when it comes to the crooked path. And you describe the poison path as a crooked path, but it requires balance between balm and bane. What's the most challenging aspect of maintaining this equilibrium? Whether it's in your own practice or someone else that if you linger too long on one side, it creates this imbalance.
So I think it's important to remember that the poisonous plants, or the plants that we associate with sort of the darker side of things, are also very healing and helpful, and we could consider them light bringers, as much as they are shadow walkers. But working with plants that are supportive and medicinal, so like more general, just kind of tonic herbs, things that we could take in very large doses every day for a long period of time and still be perfectly fine. Things like rose, lemon balm, lavender, chamomile, things that we consider to be, more innocuous. I found that that's been super important for kind of keeping that balance, not just working with these very, very chemically and spiritually potent plants, but kind of bouncing back and forth, because we need that support, especially when we're going through periods of integration, a deep healing, transmutation, shadow work, to have those more supportive allies from the light side to kind of rebuild ourselves. So rose has been one that's been super helpful for me. It's a great, just kind of general tonic herb, but also super helpful for any kind of heart healing, emotional healing, which is generally what we are faced with in that process of rebirth and kind of putting ourselves back together. healing those parts of ourselves that have been broken or damaged or hidden away for so long that they're very, very raw and they're very tender. And those plant allies really help to kind of support that process. Staying on the dark side for too long, of course, things like depression, heaviness, just sort of a general malaise or melancholy, lots of intrusive thoughts, are things that you can notice when you stay on that side for too long. So it's important to balance that and kind of rebuild yourself with things that are nourishing, not only like in plant medicines, but, exercising, eating, kind of like rebuilding your physical body too as you're going through these processes. And that's been something that has been a little bit more difficult for me personally, just kind of like remembering to take care of yourself and to heal your physical body as you're going through these processes. So I've got a lot of fire in my natal chart. So it's kind of just like endless energy to power through all of these things. And then you just sort of hit a wall and crash because you've like completely depleted yourself physically. So that lighter side kind of helps to fill in those empty spaces that the shadow work kind of rips open.
Yeah, no, no, I understand that completely. One of the things, this is a spiritual podcast, so I want to get into and be open about this, the plant spirit communication. And you introduce it as phytonosis, as this plant derived knowledge. Can you recount a moment when a plant spirit spoke to you directly? And can you go into that a little bit about how plant spirits speak and whether it's through images or feelings or however it is, in that so that people can understand the magic of this?
So phytonosis basically just means plant knowledge. And so this is just kind of information or knowledge that is transmitted directly via the plant spirits. So this could come through as mental images. It can come through as emotions, feelings. For me, like at this point, they have sort of become like such characters that exist in my mind that they're almost kind of talking to me, like all of this
Mhm.
different like personalities or characters that exist inside of me. And I know like, oh, this is the spirit of Belladonna or this is the spirit of Foxglove. And they sort of start to like accrete their own personas and their own voices. But starting out, it's going to be a very individualistic. Plants communicate in rather different ways than humans do. Also, a lot of like imagery, emotions, just kind of like sudden realizations that start to come up. So, when you begin to initiate your work with a specific plant, reading about its history, its mythology, its medicinal uses, coming into physical contact with it in the wild, growing it in your garden, just kind of paying attention to your own inner monologue. Pay attention to things that seem like they come up out of nowhere that might not be, completely your thoughts. Those things could be coming from the plants, but also paying attention to like recurring themes or stuff that you keep like looping back to over and over again and kind of ask yourself, like, how is that related to this particular plant spirit? What kind of parallel themes is that touching on that you see when you start working with them, reading about them? To kind of separate out their messages just from what is like generally going on in your own head.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I know, and I want to get into otherness because I think this is really important, the otherness of poison. And you say that poison represents otherness that witches and occultics seek. How do you reconcile this pursuit of the other with the kind of grounded everyday reality, especially living in a society that fears or demonizes these plants?
Yeah, so poison has been used as a tool to other or ostracize or demonize various different groups of people all throughout history. So in the ancient world, poison was very much a thing that people were aware of, and when it came to the honorable way of doing battle or warfare, poison was seen as a very kind of cowardly or unmanly thing. So we already start to see this kind of like condescending disposition towards the idea of poison. And then some sort of fast forward throughout human history where we see various different groups of people being accused of poisoning, whether it was poisoning the wells or spreading plague. This was something that was commonly used against the Jewish community in various different parts throughout Europe, their association with causing disease and poison and things like that. And then, women in general being associated with herbal medicine, and then also this crime of poisoning, which we start to see kind of warp into accusations of witchcraft. So very much like a form of propaganda. So with that, we're kind of tapping into this egregore or this consciousness that exists on the outside of society that is seen as harmful or detrimental by those that are in power. So that is kind of what we're tapping into. As far as kind of navigating that and, remaining part of the world or the society that we live in, I find that the poisonous plants are particularly helpful for this because they are connected to that otherness, but then they are also very much tied to the earthly realm, the physical, and they're associated with the underworld, different things like that. So when we look at sort of the full spectrum of psychoactive substances, I feel that some of them are more terrestrially oriented, more kind of grounded to the earth and what's happening down here. And then others are more celestially oriented. So they take you to all of these other different places where we can see people kind of lose their grounding and lose their ability to continue existing in the world. And that's why we'll see like some people experiment with different plant medicines and get their heads blown open. And then now they're going off and like living on a mountain and completely like separated themselves from society. Where I feel like the plants of a more poisonous nature are a little bit more grounding. And I think that has to do with their Saturnian nature and then also their association with like the sublunar realm and the underworld.
No, that's so interesting. It's kind of, I don't know if you've ever followed Rudolf Steiner, but his teachings, he has Armon, which is kind of like the earthly, more materialistic world, the spirit of that, and then a spirit, the Luciferian spirit, which is kind of go hide in a cave, have nothing, and then there's this Christ consciousness that's in the center. And I don't know how to pronounce this word, so I mean, you can help me with this. It's Venetium.
Some people say beneficium, some people say beneficium.
Okay, cool. Veneficium, I'll say I probably can pronounce it that way. And Venus, you hint at this connection between poison magic. It's like there's a blurring line between love potions and harmful poisons. What's a lesson that you learned about that? Because everybody's always like love potions, ooh, and then we going to the other side like harmful poisons. We can give this to somebody we hate, that type of thing. What's the lessons you've learned about love, magical or otherwise, through working with those plants?
Well, love potions are kind of the original poison. So the word beneficium has its root in a similar root to Venus. And so there is that association with these love potions that people were making in the ancient world that had aphrodisiac effects, but they also contained these poisonous and psychoactive plants. So in some instances, they would just outright accidentally kill people. And then in other instances, they would kind of almost act as like a very early version of like Rufinol. So pretty still in like very malleable, influential states. So there was a lot of legal discourse surrounding the use of these potions, these pocula amatoria, as far as like the harm that they could cause to people. So that's kind of where the Venusian beneficium venomous connection comes in on the poison path. So Venus is sort of one of the main triune aspects or patterns that you kind of see that keep popping up with plants on the poison path. So Venus, Saturn, Mercury. So there is that sort of aphrodisiac, glamour, influence, manipulative side to it that kind of exists in that Venusian realm. As what has it taught me? Oh gosh. So it's kind of, my love life has been a little bit of a shit show, one sort of traumatic relationship after another. So it's kind of, in a way, taught me that self-love is sort of the most important and most pure form of love that we can express, and that we're not really fully able to love other people until we really, really are able to love ourselves and kind of put our priorities and our desires desires first and really like express the truest form of that without being afraid of hiding things to, essentially protect the other person. So basically, like just letting it all hang out, all of your expectations, all of your boundaries, and really sticking to those in a way that when you are in a romantic relationship, that person is able to really, without a doubt, see where you're coming from. And then they can make their own decision about whether or not that works for them, and then either continue or go away.
No, no, that makes sense. Have you had, because you said earlier we were talking about plant spirits, and you've gotten to the point now, because you're basically an expert in this. You've gotten to the point now where they speak to you. Have they helped you in like from practical aspects with like relationships and stuff, or have given advice that you've listened to? Do you allow that to happen, or
Yes. Yes. So like if you asked the people on the other side of that, like probably not. But it's definitely been a process of like self-learning and self-awareness and really kind of understanding like where I'm at and what I want and really grounding myself in that and not feeling the need to like protect other people. Oh, I don't want to hurt their feelings. So like I'm going to just let this kind of go on as it is, even though maybe I'm not like really into it or I'm starting to see like different red flags. Like it's just kind of fine for now. And then like fast forward a year later, you're in this very like unhealthy, codependent kind of a situation that you could have just avoided altogether if you were more honest with yourself or more transparent, I guess, or not even transparent, but really just sticking to your boundaries. Because I think that when people fall in love, even though their intentions may be good, or fall into infatuation, they can sometimes become manipulative in a way that sort of just glosses over any boundaries that you may have set in the beginning because they want that idealized version of the relationship that they see so badly that they're willing to discount everything that you sort of laid out in the beginning and sort of twist things into a way that hopefully eventually leads to what their sort of expectations are. And that's where we sort of see that love can even be a poison. So, metaphorically, we think of love as being like intoxicating or like a poison of the heart and the mind, something that can make people do just very detrimental and crazy things that don't necessarily line up with, their higher purpose or their greatest good or whatever, because they kind of get intoxicated and blinded by that toxin.
do you have for beginners someone that's maybe going through a relationship issue, like you said? Maybe they're at that tail end where it's been a year or two and they're like, shit, I'm in this. Is there a simple plant practice that they could do that may help them work through this?
The one that I find to be the most helpful for any sort of matters of love and relationships that is a little bit more gentle, I guess, than some of the plants with stronger personalities, to put it nicely, would be
Mhm.
foxglove. So it is a poisonous plant, so it does have that sort of spiritual potency added to it, but it's also very supportive, very helpful for heart healing, sort of easing out of those situations in a way that's not going to be too earth shattering. So definitely working with foxglove, and you can, foxglove's grown as an ornamental, so you can find it in garden centers. You can work with it in flower essence form. You can work with the foxglove plant spirit glyph that you'll find in my first book, The Poison Path Herbal. Those are all just like symbolic representations of the plant spirit's energy that people can use in meditation, daily practices to kind of connect with that particular plant's energy.
No, I love that. Thank you. That's super practical. And we'll have that other book in the show notes also for those that are looking at being more practical. And you have in this book too, you have formulas and stuff like that. I want to get into the Valkyrie spirit the Belladonna heart of a harpy spell. And this one I really liked. It like taps into this fierce war energy, and there's like a martial aspect of it. How do you see Belladonna and how you use it and practice it? Can you go into that a little bit, especially when we're like fighting battles, personal adversity, systematic injustice?
Belladonna is typically, referred to as kind of like this seductive, feminine, alluring spirit, but it's very much has this martial warrior aspect too, and just being ferocious and bloodthirsty, very feral. So kind of embodying like both of those aspects. And I think that living in modern day world, we kind of forget that kind of warrior aspect of ourselves, or those, sort of survival mechanisms that are hardwired into us.
Mhm.
So this especially is kind of a time to embrace that warrior energy. There is a time to heal and a time to integrate and also a time to fight. And I feel like right now we're very much in sort of a survival mode of needing to take up that warrior spirit and really fight to kind of essentially dismantle some of these structures that have existed for the past 2000 years or so, and really finally kind of let them fall away once and for all. So like definitely in that transition period where we need that final kind of tip of the tower to start everything over. And I think embracing some of those more fearsome and martial aspects that are displayed in the spirit of Atropa Belladonna is a way for us to do that and to kind of give ourselves a, permission to, not just continue to exist as these silent and submissive members of a society that's really no longer working for us.
Yeah, no, that's Kobe. This one, like, really, I want to do this. I know you did it. The U tree self sacrifice. With Odin and all that. Can you go into that? Like the part like shedding parts of the self for growth? Because this part's probably spoke to me the most. So I feel like this is a ritual that I need to do. What's the most significant sacrifice you've made? Is this something that you encourage everyone to do? How did this transform you?
So the whole trope of the sacrifice god, we see that in a lot of different cultures. We see it in Norse mythology with Odin, Christianity with Jesus, Egyptian Kemetic mythology with the god Osiris, and sort of this essentially shamanic death where the person is sacrificed in one way or another and then kind of reemerges in a more fully realized way. So even, kind of as a meditation to really lay out and look at different aspects of yourself or areas of your life that are no longer serving you in a beneficial way that could be sacrificed and essentially used as fuel or catalysts to kind of drive you forward in the direction that you're wanting to go. So even as just like a meditative self-reflection practice, that imagery of like hanging yourself on the world tree, doing the sacrifice god body posture, to kind of start getting those things rising to the forefront of your mind. For me, the sacrifices have come, and I feel like they keep coming. So the first one was the sacrifice of where I was living and having to move back to my home state, which then eventually led to the deterioration of a marriage, which I was super glad to get out of that, resulted in the loss of two pets, two dogs, and then I would say two more relationships after that that have kind of been necessary sacrifices needed to continue moving on this path in my own personal kind of healing and transformation.
Do you think that the U tree was significant in this as allowing you to take that step to move? Or, what was that the catalyst in that? Because obviously sometimes I think, and I don't know for you, but sometimes we want to hold on to these relationships because it's comfortable. We don't want to do the self-sacrifice. We don't want to do the Odin on the tree, because it's painful and we don't want to go through that. So it's better just to be in this like comfortable blah like type thing. So was this a process of that? Or did you do this after or before?
So this whole process started about 10 years ago, and it was actually catalyzed through a plant medicine ceremony that I did with Belladonna and henbane. So that sort of initiated the process, which it was kind of like a tower card moment, a Saturn return moment, where just like all of a sudden, like all of these things start falling apart, falling away. You're sort of left without your sense of security. So I think through that imagery of the yew tree and the world tree in general, kind of being able to find your groundedness, find your own center axis, find your own direction, sort of that idea of like true north through that imagery of the world tree, whether it manifests as yew or ash or any number of other trees.
Yeah, no, I get that. And because there's a lot of people that, and you know this, I mean, this is what you do on a daily basis. When I read the book, I was really drawn to this. And I think a lot of people say that, because like I said before, the Frosted Flake spirituality is, it's fake. It's not real. And I know there's love and light on both sides, but in the dark qualities of these poison plants, there is a spiritual medicine. But what do you, because there's a lot of people that would say, this is going to taint the practitioners. It's not going to create real healing. What would you say to those type of people that would be like, oh, don't go there, don't do that type of a thing?
I would tell them to really sit with that and look at themselves and really genuinely try to understand like where that fear is coming from. Like what are you actually so afraid of? And why? I think that people get too attached to the whole dark and light thing. I use it a lot to describe the interaction of certain energies, but like when it all comes down to it, like it's all part of the same spectrum. So it's just a way of expressing different energies. While I consider myself more of a left-hand path practitioner, a lot of what I do is kind of filtered through this darker or more shadowy sort of a lens. When I think of like who I am, how I interact with the world, how I interact with the people that I care about, just my whole motivation for doing all of this, I would very much describe myself as sort of a light worker that likes to play in the darkness. And I think that, it's in the darkness and that willingness to journey into those places that we're able to really achieve the deepest and most genuine healing and growth. And I think that these very like polarized light dark, looking at like the very cringy like light worker side of things, like I see that as being the real toxin.
100%. Yeah, because you're just, if you never deal with the shadow, then you got to have the yin and the yang. I mean, it's all equal, it's all the same, it's all oneness. So if you're just light, 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 light all the time, then it's not, there's no work to be done, like in the sense of who you are. And like you said, it sucks. Like we don't want that crucifixion. No one wants that, but that's what has to happen, that shedding of the skin. I want to get into this because, the psychedelic renaissance is like this huge thing. Everybody's like running to South America to do ayahuasca and all that. It's so funny. You would think that this would go hand in hand with that. How do you see these two movements converging? And what unique contribution do you think the poison path has to offer this psychedelic renaissance?
I think that the overall interest and acceptance of psychedelic plant medicine is helping with the curiosity and acceptance of working with plants that we would describe as poisonous. So plants in the nightshade family, wolfsbane, foxglove, different things like that we wouldn't necessarily qualify as being psychedelic in the same way as ayahuasca, San Pedro, magic mushrooms. So very different chemical processes, very different experiences, but sort of still under that umbrella of psychoactive. I have a lot of thoughts about this topic. So I think in general, the psychedelic renaissance has been a good thing and it's been helpful, and it's sort of giving people permission for that curiosity to explore the consciousness enhancing effects of a variety of different plants. When we consider poison and how it's been used to sort of demonize not only different groups of people, but also plants from different parts of the world, we even see sacred plant medicine like ayahuasca being described as like a diabolical poison by, clergy members that were over there like exploring during like the early days of colonization and all of that. And a lot of these, chemically potent plants that are very significant ceremonial herbs in different parts of the world also kind of took on that poisonous label for one reason or another. So I think that the poison path is just another branch kind of on that tree. But I feel like it's a different path. It's a different energy. There's different spirits that you would connect to when you walk that path. And I don't think that that's always in alignment with the spirits and paths of other plant medicine practices. So I think that with all of the popularity in what we're calling the psychedelic renaissance, which is essentially like the Western European discovery of indigenous plant medicine in North, South, Central America, which is very much like fixated on that part of the world. And we're starting to see like a lot of like plant medicine tourism, so people traveling to these parts in the world, which isn't always, beneficial for the local communities, or it's sort of starting to turn into like this commodified commercial kind of a thing, which isn't great. I think that there is benefits to more people seeking out this plant medicine, people being able to uh, make a living off of it to support their communities. But I also think that there is like a very big potential for harm, not only in those communities from Westerners that do not sort of understand their impact or what they're doing, but then also for the people that are going on these plant medicine retreats, and maybe they are not prepared for it, maybe they're not getting the integration aftercare that they need, maybe the people that are leading the ceremonies are not the best intentioned people. There's just a lot of, I think, potential for causing greater harm in a lot of different ways. So I think that that's something that we need to approach very like mindfully and carefully. And to me, the poison path kind of gives us a reminder that like, hey, there are these very powerful plant spirits, master plant spirits, plants that are capable of creating these entheogenic experiences that we can benefit from, that are found in all different parts of the world. So it's not just about, seeking out the indigenous plant medicines of North and South America, but also kind of remembering this global concept of plant spirit work and plant spirit medicine. And that's not to create like a boundary or a distinction or be like gatekeeping or say that one is better than the other, but I just think that it's something that there needs to be like caution and awareness and kind of a willingness to explore some of these other plant allies too, because
Mhm,
not everyone is going to feel called to work with the same plant medicine.
mhm,
For example, a lot of people are very called to work with ayahuasca. I'm not one of those people, and I don't know if that is because of the plant spirits that I've allied myself with. Some people may say that it's a form of resistance, or, something in me that needs healing, that doesn't want healing, that's causing you to have this resistance to work with this plant medicine. But I don't necessarily believe that. I think that sometimes that resistance is something that we need to pay attention to and listen to and be like, is this really me not wanting to heal certain things? Or is there like a real reason that is there, and not trying to like push through that and then wind up, fucking things up even more by
mhm.
something shouldn't have been doing in the first place.
Yeah, no, no, and I have a personal experience on this, it wasn't pleasant, and I don't think I wanna do it again, you know what I mean, as far as that goes? It was horrific, it's the most horrific thing I've ever experienced, and I've been to war and, was in the Marine Corps and, saw people die and stuff, and so I wasn't ready, and like you said, the integration and everything, and I'm afraid this is what so when I talk to people, I can only share my experience, but I feel like there should be preparation and it should be months or years, before this is approached, not this recreational touristic. Let's hop on a boat and go through the jungle, and want to see a jaguar. I mean, some people have a amazing, and I'm not discounting anyone's experience. I would never do that. But I feel like this is kind of more, and it sounds funny because it's a poison path, but I feel like you can do this in more of a grounded way. Does that make sense? You don't
Yeah.
have to get blasted out of your mind?
Yeah, and that goes back to just sort of this sense of certain plant medicines being more chthonic, more earth oriented, and other plant medicines being more like celestially oriented. And I don't know if that's like a feminine masculine thing in their energies, or I'm still kind of like sussing that out. But I do feel like there are just as effective but more subtle ways that that can be approached.
Yeah, I would encourage people to start slowly and work with safe plants and kind of, if you want to do that, work yourself up to that over many years. That's what I always encourage people. And I think this is a great path to start because you could do this extremely safely. And you talk about that in the book. The poison path is animistic and it's recognizing spirits and plants and fungi. How do you think this worldviews kind of reshape your relationship or people that you work with towards the natural world? And I know there's a lot of skeptics who struggle to connect with like non-human intelligences. What would you say to them and how did it help you in understanding, all these spirits and plants?
It's always kind of been part of my worldview. I think that it's definitely helped me to be able to empathize with them a lot more deeply than maybe somebody that doesn't feel that connection. But I think as far as like being skeptical about it, I think skepticism can be healthy, but I think that in this particular case, it is just undeniable that consciousness is everywhere. Just talking about plants in particular, like I think that it is pretty like physically evident that plants have some kind of consciousness or awareness. May not be exactly the same as ours, but they are not just this dead, empty matter. And I think that science is also, pretty much proven that at this point. So I don't think that it's necessarily something that you can be skeptical about anymore. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, no, that's awesome. I want to leave with this. We've gone over an hour. In your final words in the book, you express hope that readers will rethink poison, witch, those words. Looking ahead, what legacy do you want the Poison Path Grimoire to leave? And how do you, in the work that you're doing, I want to talk about you and the work that you're doing now. How do you envision the Poison Path evolving in the next decade?
So, as far as the legacy of the Poison Path Grimoire in particular, I just hope that that gives people more inspiration on different ways that they can start working with these plants within their own practices. So, the rituals, the symbolism, the things that I point out in my book are essentially things from my own personal practice. So it doesn't have to be through in the context of like European witchcraft traditions, but simply as examples of different ways that people can start incorporating them into their own spiritual practice. So the main message that's kind of come through like the battle cry of the Poison Path Grimoire has been empowerment. And I, didn't realize when I wrote it, sort of the theme that runs through the entire book and the timing of when the book came out, right after but essentially the day after the election, that this was like going to parallel so much of what was going to be happening in the world. So definitely the legacy of that being empowerment, just very individualistically empowering. Like there's no right or wrong way to incorporate these plants into your spiritual practice. And there's so little I feel like that has sort of survived and transmitted down throughout history that we're essentially rebuilding a lot of this work. So that's open to interpretation. And in the next 10 years, I don't know. I've got my third book on the poison path that I'm working on right now. And then after that, I think, it might be time to pivot a little bit or do a little bit more of like my own personal work. Like I feel like I've kind of said everything that I have to share up until this point, but I know that there's a lot more there. There's a lot more voices that are passionate about working with these plants that are really coming out too. And I think it's through the collective of all of those different voices chiming in that we really start to see like the full scope of what all of this has to offer.
No, I love that. I want to close in this, and we'll talk about your website. And like I said, I encourage people to get your books. One of the things that whether people like the Bible or not doesn't matter. I do love the scripture where it says that the opposite of love is fear. And what your book taught me is that the poison path is about taking a closer look at what we fear. So we can't look at love if we're fearful. And so this I think is like a really cool aspect and something totally new that I've never paid attention to that has drawn me closer to look at this and to look at my fears. And I think that's, a blessing to others. And that's what your book can do and heal so many people. And I know you've seen it, you've seen people be healed from it. What's your website, Coby? And how can people, if they want to know more about this or they want to get involved, how can they do that?
The website is thepoisonersapothecary.com. There's a lot of different articles that are on there on the blog page. You can also check out the different products, the different formulas. There's a lot of different ways of connecting with and incorporating these plants into your practice. So I try and present like a very broad array of that. And then you can also follow me on social media at Poisoner's Apothecary. Most of my posting on Instagram.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we'll have all that in the show notes, and you guys click on that and subscribe and have fun. Start, we encourage everybody to start, but do it safely because I even have the triple word of it. It's like, oh, but you have disclaimers and stuff like that. So I think it's awesome. Well, thank you, Coby. I appreciate it, and thank you for being on the HDL podcast.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you.